Well, Louisa Lytton and Katie Russell from Rape Crisis join me now, and I know that you came back specifically, really, for this storyline. It meant so much to you.
Yeah, I got a phone call from John York to say we'd love to bring your character back, and here's the nature of the story.
Yeah.
And yeah, obviously as an actress, I was just kind of grateful to be trusted with such an important storyline. So I've said, yeah, of course I'll do it.
Because it is very important. This is all about, isn't it, Katie, consent.
Absolutely, that's what's at the heart of this storyline, and we really welcome dramas, especially ones as popular as EastEnders, that reach so many people and such a diverse audience, tackling topics like this, because it's evident, it'll be evident as the story unfolds with the characters, but it's evident as well with the way that the public has already received the scenes so far, that we still have a lot of public education and awareness raising to do when it comes to the issue of consent, which people sometimes refer to as a grey area, but which is actually really quite straightforward in law.
You say no, surely.
Well, it's that someone consents to sex or sexual activity when they agree by choice and they have the freedom and capacity to make that choice.
Exactly.
So there might even be a circumstance in which someone has gone along with it or said yes, but because they're frightened for their lives or because they're in a coercive, controlling relationship. But certainly the circumstance that we see here in this storyline where Louisa's character talks about having frozen, that's a very common experience, a very common response to trauma. We know about fight or flight as responses to terrifying situations, but there's also actually freeze and flop, which are actually much more common responses. They're physiological. We don't always necessarily have any conscious control over them. In fact, we usually don't. But they're our body's way of protecting ourselves from further harm. So quite often, victims and survivors will talk to us at Rape Crisis about having frozen, and sometimes, like Ruby, they feel conflicted about that because they feel like maybe they should have done more or spoken out. But actually, consent is not just not saying no or not fighting back. It's actively, positively, freely saying yes.
Indeed, no, that makes absolute perfect sense. It really does, and it's not just educating girls. It's not just telling girls. We've got to educate men as well and boys. You know that has. And as far as this is going, what sort of reaction have you had so far?
Well, a great reaction, and I was quite surprised. I've had loads of people message me, you know, directly on social media, just saying this is the closure that I've needed for so long. You know, this incident happened to me 10 years ago. I questioned whether it was rape or not. This episode has confirmed to me that, in fact, it was.
I mean, that's where soaps really do help. I mean, obviously you worked very, very closely, because you have to get it right. You know, there's a real responsibility there for you, for all the writers, producers, everyone getting involved has to get this right, because it is, you know, it affects people's lives.
Of course, and you know, ultimately we're only telling one story. We're only telling Ruby's story, but you have to do this justice because there will be millions of viewers watching that will relate and that kind of almost need this as support or as confirmation. So it is important that it is done right. It's
really interesting what you were saying there about the fact that some people feel really ashamed almost afterwards and they don't quite know what to do, and they feel that maybe they should have done more. But that thing that you said about freezing, that is so interesting, and I can completely understand that.
Yeah, and
if you're not there, you don't know.
Yeah.
You don't.
That's the first thing you said to me, actually, because I questioned it myself. You know, people will be saying, why doesn't she fight back? Why? And the first thing you said is, well, that is one of your body's natural reactions.
Yeah, it's almost shutting down, isn't it? It's almost shutting down because terrible things happen to you.
So raising awareness of that so that survivors, the very many victims and survivors, as Louisa says, who will inevitably be watching, can understand actually that's a common reaction. It's not your fault. I mean, this is the fundamental issue here. It is never the victim or survivor's fault. We all have responsibility in sexual relationships to be 100% confident that the person that we're with is just as happy with everything that's happening between us as we are, and remembering that their consent can be given, can be refused, or can be taken back at any time. So someone might also change their mind or consent to one thing but not another, or, as in this case, consent to sex with one person person, but not another person. And we need to be aware that consent is a live thing. It's not something that you get once and you bank for future. Someone may consent to have sex with you one time, but not want to have sex with you a future time. And we're all human beings, and we have to have that empathy and that awareness in our relationships. Otherwise, we're never going to see the very high prevalence of sexual violence reduced, and we're never going to see the trauma that it causes and the impacts that it has on people's lives and relationships and communities reduced.